The
Your
courtroom went
Honor, I
silent
have
so
something to
suddenly that
say.
even the ceiling
Sweetheart,
fans
let the
seemed
judge
afraid to
speak.
breathe.
It's all right. Go
The
ahead,
sound
son.
that had filled the room a
The first
moment
word must
earlier,
say are about the
murmurs,
truth.
shuffling
We are here
papers,
today because
restrained
justice
coughs,
matters to
collapsed
everyone.
into a heavy stillness as the small boy stepped forward, his shoes barely making a whisper against the polished wooden floor. He looked
Is that the
impossibly young
document?
against the
Yes, Your
towering oak
Honor.
benches and the
And what
stern
does it show?
expressions carved
It's
into
about the
adult
agreement.
faces. 9 years old, dark brown skin glowing under the sterile white lights. A navy blazer slightly too large on his narrow shoulders. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of something no child should have to carry. Before we continue, if you believe every story hides a lesson, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Humanity Stories. You never know which story might change someone's heart today. The judge leaned back, skeptical. The jury members exchanged subtle glances. The defense attorney looked uncomfortable, almost irritated. The boy stood beside the defendant's table, where his mother sat in a faded gray dress, eyes swollen from nights without sleep. She avoided looking at him, as if afraid that meeting his eyes might break what little strength she had left. The charges against her were serious: theft, conspiracy, fraud. Words that sounded too heavy to belong in the same room as a child clutching a stack of handwritten notes. Outside, rain streaked against the courthouse windows, blurring the city skyline into a wash of gray. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of old paper and polished wood. The boy's heart pounded in his ears, but his mind was clear. He had spent nights at the small kitchen table in their apartment, law books borrowed from the public library stacked beside cold cups of tea. While other children memorized multiplication tables, he memorized case precedents. While others dreamed of cartoons and playgrounds, he dreamed of statutes and legal definitions. Not because he wanted to be special, but because he wanted his mother to come home. When he began to speak, his voice was soft but steady. He did not sound like a child reciting something memorized. He sounded like someone who had read every word and understood its weight. He referenced specific clauses in state law, explained procedural errors during the investigation, and carefully dismantled the timeline presented by the prosecution. The room shifted. The judge's eyebrow lifted almost imperceptibly. A juror leaned forward. Even the prosecutor stopped writing. The boy described how evidence had been logged without proper documentation, how a witness statement conflicted with surveillance timestamps, how the financial records used against his mother lacked authentication. His small fingers flipped through papers with surprising precision. He paused only once, swallowing hard, when he mentioned the night officers came to their apartment. The flashing red and blue lights. The neighbors watching from cracked doors. His mother's hands shaking as they cuffed her. He did not cry. He did not beg. He simply continued. There was something almost unbearable about the contrast, a child's round cheeks and soft voice carrying arguments that seasoned attorneys sometimes struggle to articulate. The courtroom, once skeptical, now felt like it was witnessing something fragile and extraordinary at the same time. Not a spectacle, not a performance, but a quiet eruption of intellect forged under pressure. One juror, an older woman with silver streaks in her hair, felt her throat tighten. She had grandchildren his age. She imagined them holding comic books, not legal briefs. Another juror pressed his lips together, replaying the inconsistencies the boy had just outlined. The defense attorney, who had initially objected to allowing the child to speak, now stared at him with a mixture of humility and disbelief. The judge finally asked a question, testing him gently but deliberately. The boy answered without hesitation, citing not only the law but its interpretation in a similar case from years earlier. His memory was sharp, but it was his understanding that stunned the room. He wasn't parroting, he was reasoning. His mother finally looked up. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In hers was a storm of pride and heartbreak. In his was something quieter, determination wrapped around fear. He was still 9. He still missed bedtime stories. He still slept with the hallway light on. But in that moment, he stood like someone far older. When he finished, silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't skepticism. It was reflection. The jury retreated to deliberate, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. The boy returned to his seat, his hands finally shaking as adrenaline drained from his small body. He stared at the wooden floor, counting the lines in the grain to keep himself steady. Minutes felt like hours. The rain outside softened into a whisper. Somewhere in the building, a clock ticked loudly enough to sound like a hammer. When the jury came back, their faces were no longer unreadable. Something had shifted. The verdict would eventually be recorded in transcripts and filed away in courthouse archives, but what lingered in that room was something far less official and far more human. It was the realization that brilliance can grow in the unlikeliest soil. That resilience can bloom where childhood should have been carefree.